Well, economist Sean Turnell has been freed from a Myanmar prison, reunited with his wife, Ha, and other family in Australia. Joining me live is Elaine Pearson, Asia Director with Human Rights Watch. Thanks very much for your time. We've got a lovely picture of this reunion. We seem to think that Sean's doing pretty well, albeit it's quite the ordeal. So I'm sure, he's pretty battered physically and emotionally as well.
Yeah, no, look, this is the news that we've been waiting to hear. I mean, he spent 650 days in custody. Sean Turnell should not have spent 1 second in a Burmese prison. So he was released as part of a broader prisoner amnesty for Burma's National Day. About 6,000 prisoners were released. Sean was among them. Also, the UK former ambassador to Myanmar, Vicky Bowman, and her Burmese husband were released. Also a Japanese photojournalist and an American botanist. So I think this is, welcome relief, obviously for Sean's family and friends and for the other families of those who've been released. But I think it's also a stark reminder that there are still thousands of other Burmese citizens who remain behind bars for peaceful acts of free expression. And so I think the international community really needs to keep up the pressure on the junta to call for the release of all political prisoners.
And that pressure in terms of from the Australian government, now that Sean Turnell is back in the country, should that come in the form of sanctions being placed back on Myanmar?
Yes, we haven't seen any targeted sanctions from the Australian government since the coup last year. It's been almost 2 years. This is in contrast to the UK, the US, the EU, which has put targeted sanctions on numerous individual perpetrators of abuses, senior generals, as well as military-owned businesses. So I think it's well overdue for Australia to join those countries. And, really, if we want to have, pressure on the junta, we need coordinated international action. So one, this means targeted sanctions. Two, it also means an international arms embargo. Australia already has an arms embargo on Myanmar, but we want to see one through the UN Security Council. So I think getting other governments to express their support for this is really important, as well as support for an international criminal court referral, given that we know that crimes against humanity are being perpetrated today in Myanmar. I mean, every day we're hearing of more airstrikes, the killing of children, the killing of civilians, and journalists who are in prison.
The other thoughts turn to Australian families with loved ones being held in China. Do you see any scope maybe for some momentum from this, or is the Chinese Communist Party going to be a different beast?
Well, I mean, I think it was encouraging that we had the meeting of Prime Minister Albanese and President Xi, and we know that this issue was raised on the fringes of the G20. I think now the ball is really in China's court, but the Chinese government needs to know that it can't just, hold Australian citizens arbitrarily. And so, we are really thinking of Cheng Lei, of Yang Hengjun, who, have spent numerous time in Chinese prisons. But we're also thinking of the families of Australian Uyghurs who are detained in Xinjiang. So I think it's really important that the pressure is kept up, not only for Australian nationals who are detained, but for, the numerous human rights abuses that are taking place in China today.
Just want to ask you finally as well, the world about to focus on Qatar. Hosting the World Cup is just, well, I suppose in the basket of what's called sports washing these days. They're trying to give a positive impression. I suppose they're winning in regards to everyone sending their teams there. How much do you think we're going to focus, though, on things such as lack of fair trial, women's rights in Qatar, and foreign labour as well, foreign workers?
Well, I think this World Cup is really tainted by the blood of migrant workers who have died building those stadiums. And I think, numerous, sports teams have spoken out, including the Socceroos, about that. And I think that pressure will continue throughout the World Cup. So, this is not just about, congratulating and cheering on our teams who are playing on the field, but it's also recognising the current situation in Qatar. And so one of our calls has been to set up some kind of compensation scheme for the families of migrant workers who have died building those stadiums. And so I think it's really important that FIFA also get behind this, and that there is adequate and fair compensation to those families, as well as, raising other issues that, have been coming up. Women's rights in Qatar, for instance, and also LGBT rights.